certain areas. Not going to probably affect the areas of a major concern around the outskirts and some of the coverage gaps that still exist today. We looked at some transmit steering options here, and that's really a short-term solution. One of the areas we tried to look at is taking the step from how do we take 5 baby steps to get where we need to, how do we, can we jump to the end and, move forward with that. A lot of that just depends on funding availability and how we can help support that from the infrastructure side and then overall on the planning side of it. So the first option here, and this is really a lot of it associated with paging and the capability to steer some of the pagers out there from different tower sites to provide some of the better coverage. So what I'm talking about here is instead of looking at that single transmitter that we had before trying to page across the whole way through the county, you can leverage any of those 5 existing sites to page off of there and get better improvement. So when I talked before with replacing the one tower for a higher antenna, you get about 8% coverage better. If you take that single transmitter and start transmitting from all of those sites, or just one at a time, maybe you can't transmit at all of them, but by transmitting across all of those sites, depending on what area you need to, you increase the coverage 38%. So that's a huge difference for, especially from paging alone there. That's just the starting point there from the paging aspect. There's a little bit more work that would have to go into that for the other systems out there, for sheriff, for the fire voice and those areas like that too. But from a paging aspect, that's a very easier portion there to start improving coverage, pretty much today for just some of the paging areas there to try and get that message out there. Again, that is a short-term type of option we're out there. That's almost another, piecemeal one, but a lot of having all the base stations out there and the capability from many of the dispatch centers, that's something that can be done sooner rather than later, as opposed to, waiting for the all-fix-all system that'll come into place here. I've looked at other systems out there as a conventional simulcast system. This also has the opportunity really to take your existing system, leverage some of the facilities, the towers, slowly kind of progress to a simulcast solution, which is taking those 5 sites, even potentially adding another site to try and fill some coverage holes, and transmitting on those all at the same time. So now when you transmit it all at the same time, you get a little bit more coverage overlap. You get a little bit more coverage benefits from those areas there, which is very typical in a lot of different counties there. It's just you get a little bit more spectrum efficiency with your frequencies as well. It removes a lot of the interference that could be going on out there, because now you're controlling that from a computer as opposed to people transmitting on the same frequency at different locations out there. The step door in this direction is still a pretty hefty step. And a lot of that is split between facility upgrades that still would be necessary, and the other side of that would be the infrastructure. You're still purchasing a lot of new radios over time here, but it would give you a slower transition to P25 though, and it would be a very similar type of environment you have today. The bigger issue is that this really limits your growth over the next 5 to 10 years of trying to add channels, to add sites, because now you're sticking with some frequency band that is just very congested, it's not well organized, and trying to expand some of those licenses and add additional channels is going to be very cumbersome, if not impossible. And on top of that, the number of users already on the system is well outside of the typical for this type of system. So, you almost could probably survive based on how the calls are coming in now, but this is definitely going to stunt some of the growth moving forward like that. So this is more of would be a stepping stone in the long term of, could you take some improvements here, moving to simulcast, and then trying to, eventually you'd have to move out probably into a trunking system much further down the road. One of the goals of this entire assessment is trying to figure out, what is that strategic vision? What is that long-term goal here that we can help start steering towards? And is there some steps along the way? We tried to look at that and provide some information of, the pros and cons. If you took this as a stepping stone, you're going to have a lot of stranded investment into this here, because you're going to have 5, 10 years down the road, you're going to start running into other issues that aren't prevalent today. The other one here is shared systems, and this is options 3 and 4 in the report. I kind of clumped them together here in this presentation to try and to emphasize the county is in a unique position with where it's at with sharing potential that is not prevalent everywhere in the U.S. because one of the options I didn't even look into here was to build out your own P25 trunking system there, because that adds millions of dollars on top of this just for having a system core out there that control a radio system. So not getting into all the details of how that's all put together there is a lot of cost that's associated with that with some of this shared system like Marks, or even this is one example, the city of Parma, Medina counties up north. Really, the focus of that is a regional system. There's potentially even other opportunities. Anyone that's got a trunk system out there theoretically could be a regional system. You could even connect to a core in Texas nowadays if you really wanted to. It's not usually recommended, but it's definitely the capability there. So we're trying to look at 2 different areas there. With Marks, that provides interoperability and coverage for primary users across the state there, to just a regional system there that has less governance associated with it, so there's a lot of potential risk and unknowns with how you actually get on board there, what kind of costs would be associated with that, because you have to develop that from scratch. I can't do a presentation where we're talking about this without talking a little bit about price and see where this is kind of looking at there. And you can definitely see some of the cost potential savings with the different options. Even again, option 2, a lot of that is a higher cost because of the fact that we're looking at building out a lot on the facility side, as well as a lot of replacing the equipment over time here. And we're still looking at a total subscriber replacement eventually, if you ever want to transition to P25, because there's P25 conventional or trunking there. But again, that's where where the industry is going here, and trying to do a technology refresh and catch up a little bit there from where others are going here as well. Just looking at we talked about the infrastructure side, the MARC system has a lower cost because there's existing sites already in the county here, and I think some of that will be covered even later on here today. And then there's a lot more infrastructure on the regional system, because you're going to have to build out the entire infrastructure here on your own here, which will have a little bit of repetitiveness on coverage between the MARBs and for a regional system here too. But when I looked at somewhat of the different options there. And then for the actual radios themselves, this is the actual portables and mobiles. We're trying to we have accounts of the radios there we're trying to look at. This number is very fluent depending on what kind of features, what kind of radios you want there. Do you want any sort of keypad display? Do what kind of options do you want associated with that? Do you want it to talk to other systems there? Do you want multi-band radios that talk 800, VHF? A lot of different options associated with that. In general, even just, if everyone gets in alignment and does a procurement together, you're going to get much lower costs of radio as opposed to just going out and buying one radio there. So a lot of range potential there. Some of this is even based probably around $2,000 roughly or so, just on an average across the board based on the number of subscribers out there for like a P25 800 megahertz trunk radio there. Again, we've seen them as low as $1,100 depending on some of the procurements there, even higher if you want the multi-band radio. So definitely a range of some of those there, and just looking at the overall cost there as we kind of viewed it. And we also, I don't have it on here too, but different maintenance is different for different options here as well, depending on if it's some user requirements for user fees, or if it's just based on you owning and maintaining the infrastructure. One of the last ones before I open up to any of the questions there, again, just to kind of recap where some of our recommendations and next steps were, is in the short term, implement the transmit steering for the paging, kind of working through some of the aspects associated with that to, can you get a bigger bang for the buck today without a lot of effort there? And that definitely has a lot of potential there, as you mentioned, just on the coverage impact alone. The long-term goal is trying to really set forward to a shared P25 trunk system. We see as one of the biggest bangs for the buck, considering that if you take any other steps in the process, you're going to either have limitations later, or you're going to have a lot of stranded investment, and that's even on the radio side alone, because building out a trunk system in the future here is not going to be on the same frequencies you have today, because you're just not going to have enough spectrum to be able to do that. The setting the goal and setting that long-term vision, I think, you know, Joe will probably talk even a little bit more about that. And, you know, there's a couple steps along the process really to start moving that in that general direction, where to start finding the right sites. I think we'll see maybe a little bit more of that a little bit later here. And then there's a lot of grant opportunities available. I think we'll talk about a little bit here too, that for the P25 radios and how we can get on board with that. And there's every year there's certain ones that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with there. So with that, any questions on the study?